Well, I'm here as an old guy to talk with you about journalism. But I first want to thank all of you for being here, thank all of you for supporting this group. Um, Thanks especially to the two Joes. I've done my little bit by writing these books on abortion history and adoption, but I've always been able to move away from the subject for a few years when it got depressing and then come back to it. Joe Point and I go way back, and I'm impressed that he has persevered year after year. So thank you, and thanks to all of you. Yeah. Yeah, that is perseverance of the saints, as we Presbyterians tend to say. It's 2024, and I turn 74 next month. So I want to start with a tribute to a commercial that maybe only a journalist would like. You've probably seen commercials from the Davis law firm where attorney Jeff Davis screams, 4, 4, 4, 4. There's only one number to remember, 4, 4, 4. So I'm going to take you back to a few moments in journalism from 1974, 1984, 1994, 2004. That's 4, 4, 4. And then I'll come back to 2024. I also have a teaser for you. Duke University is celebrating this year its 100th anniversary. In 1924, the Dukes, the Duke family, had made a fortune off of what can kill people, cigarettes, but they donated $40 million to turn a small college called Trinity into a major university. So keep this in mind, and I'll explain a little bit why you should. Now, let me jump to 1974 for a 50th anniversary look at a hero. In 1974, there was a Los Angeles Times reporter named David Shaw. An editor assigned him to a new beat of the newspaper, media critic. And they told him, do tough reporting on news media, including the LA Times itself. And Shaw did that for the next 16 years. Then in 1990, David Shaw wrote a series of articles showing how major news media, including the Los Angeles Times, displayed pro-abortion bias via words and images. And David Shaw went into the particular word choice that newspapers, including the LA Times, used. The Times and other newspapers called abortion advocates pro-choice. They refused to call abortion opponents pro-life. Shaw complained that his own newspaper, the LA Times, referred to a new Louisiana law at that point as the nation's harshest. And he noted, hey, that's the view of abortion advocates. It's harsh towards women's rights, they said. But if you look at it from the standpoint of an opponent of abortion, it's not harsh, it's benevolent. And he pointed out that word choice. He said his newspapers called laws that slightly reduced abortion restrictive rather than protective. And then he looked at pictures, or especially the absence of pictures, showing unborn children. He had lots of specific detail. He even recommended a book I'd written a couple of years before about the press and abortion from 1838 to 1988, an academic book which showed how major newspapers, up until about 1962, were often pro-life, and then they switched over during the 1960s and became pro-abortion, where they've been ever since. Well, reporters committed to abortion hated David Shaw's series of articles on that. And he became almost excommunicated within the Los Angeles Times newsroom. And that's why I see him as a hero for telling the truth, even when it hurt. He won a Pulitzer Prize in 1991 for articles on a different subject. And the Los Angeles Times management, as was customary, delivered lots of champagne bottles to the newsroom for a big celebration, they thought. Many of the bottles were returned unopened. So now I can raise a toast in a way to David Shaw. Posthumously, he died in 2005 at age 62 from a brain tumor. He told the truth. And to my knowledge, no newspaper, major newspaper in the past 3 decades has published any kind of a self-analysis on their own abortion coverage. which doesn't go with the, as I'll say, with the basic understandings of journalism, such as be specific, show, don't tell. Show, for example, what an unborn child looks like, rather than just proclaiming and emphasizing the rhetoric of the abortion side. Am I getting to Duke University? Not yet. Just wait a little. Let's go to a 40th anniversary. My wife Susan started in 1984. What was known as the Austin Crisis Pregnancy Center. It's still in business. It's now called The Source. And the Austin American Statesman did a hit job on it real quickly. But happily, since I was a journalism professor, I knew enough to advise her to tape all the interviews that the reporter did with Susan and the office director at that point. The reporter had mangled the quotation so badly that the issue wasn't even bias. It was basically minimal professional standards. So Susan and I went to the Statesman offices at a time when they were still populated by reporters, unlike mostly now. We played the tape for the editors and hinted that we could sue for libel, which we could have. But I did not have to go. I don't know if Jeff Davis was around then saying 4. But we didn't have to go to lawyers there. The editors actually acknowledged the errors. They made restitution by giving us front page space in the Sunday section, equal in length and prominence to the reporter's article. Within the confines of their ideology, they were honest. And again, this is Austin, not Washington, D.C., so things are a little better. Now, the Statesman, as you know, these days is so hollowed out that it sometimes it doesn't even report on a Longhorns game at night in the next day's newspaper. It's really sad. And that saddens me, despite its bias in some ways, because there were some decent folks there. Is it time for Duke University? Almost. The pro-life movement in 1994, 30 years ago, hit a low point in public opinion polls. Reporters played up the murder of one abortionist, which was sad and wrong. They ignored the killing of 1.5 million unborn children in 1994. And yet, in 1994, at just the time when the pro-life movement needed a break, it got one. Until then, there was ultrasound, but it was something really only doctors could use. It was hard to discern what exactly was going on in murky pictures from early on ultrasound machines. And then a team that, here it is, at Duke University, developed the first three-dimensional ultrasound. And they did not do it for pro-life reasons, as far as I know. They were interested in the technology, but in God's providence, it really was a game changer. Before, women could look at pictures or plastic models and see a baby. Now they could watch on a screen my baby, or sometimes with their boyfriends, our baby. I interviewed lots of heads of pro-life centers. It made a huge difference. Typically among abortion-prone women, it changed from maybe 20% of them deciding to actually proceed with the pregnancy to 60 or 70%. So technology really helped. In 1994 also, I started meeting with George W. Bush and talking with him about compassionate conservatism, which became his slogan. And when he was elected governor in 1994 and then in 1998 again, and became president after the very long 2000 election, which lasted 5 weeks after voting day. It became his campaign slogan as governor and then as the presidential candidate. I asked for one thing in return. Large crisis pregnancy centers at the end of the 1990s were buying ultrasound machines. Small ones could not afford them. And so my ask was that if he were elected president, the federal government, as part of health spending, could pay for ultrasound machines that every center would therefore have. And George W., during the 2000 campaign, he planned to give a speech committing to that. It did not happen. I asked why, and campaign people told me that Pat Buchanan, a strong pro-lifer, had announced his candidacy for president one day before the speech was about to be given. And George W. Bush did not want to be seen as responding to Pat Buchanan. And one postponement made it to another, and he never made that pledge, not in 2000 or in 2004. But he did, though, and I still like the guy, he emphasized what he called promoting a culture of life. And that's really important. I mean, the law, as you all know, is crucial. And I'm thankful very much for the Dobbs decision. But what it needs, especially in these days of chemical abortion being so readily available, we need a culture of life. And Bush kicked off his 2004 campaign by saying, in the debate about the rights of the unborn, we are asked to broaden the circle of our moral concern. There was a New York Times reporter back in 1976 who wrote originally, a columnist wrote anonymously at first, a story about how she got an abortion because she and her husband decided, they already had children, they decided we just don't have room for another. And then this still gets to me that she wrote in this column, which appeared in the New York Times on their op-ed page, about how sometimes at night, when looking over the ocean, she would see a picture of this little baby that would have been born. And she says, this is in the column in the New York Times, she says, and I wave at the baby, and the baby waves at me. And I know, yes, we had room. We could have had room, and we didn't. So, occasionally you do see things break through. And by the way, I should mention that George W. Bush in 2004 became the only Republican presidential candidate in the last 35 years to actually win a majority of the popular vote. He beat John Kerry that year by 3 million votes. So, as you know, we have a lot of cruelty in politics now, but I still hope and pray that people will respond to compassion, as a lot of people did in 1994. God says in Zechariah 4:6 that triumph comes not by might nor by power, but by spirit. Amen, indeed. And that's spirit with a capital S. But there is a secular version of that exists. In 2014, another 4, the number of abortions was down 50% from its peak in 1994. 1.6 million down to about 800,000. We were slowly developing a culture of life. Now, since then, and recently the past several years, the number has increased, even with our good law in Texas and other places. Chemical abortions have become the main killing device. I'm glad, I'm very glad that we in Texas protect unborn babies from abortionists. But in 2024, with chemical abortions now readily available, I still think most unborn babies in the U.S. as a whole will be saved, to apply Zechariah, not by force, not by edict, not even by law, but by mothers and fathers having changes of heart. So my question here, are journalists helping or hurting this process of changing hearts? And sadly, the answer is hurting. Reporters basically repeatedly break the journalistic rules that I and others used to teach at UT School of Journalism, and still are occasionally applied, but often forgotten. Basic rule: show, don't tell. 3 days ago, the New York Times headlined a story, "Inside an abortion clinic days before Florida's 6-week ban takes effect." I saw that headline and thought, wow, good. They're finally going to take us inside an abortion business and show what goes on there. The reporter took us only as far as the abortion center's, quote, small beige waiting room. That's as far as we got. And then she just quoted lots and lots of pro-abortion sentiments. How do we fight such journalistic bias? And it seems to me we need to keep doing it patiently with the perseverance of a Joe Poyman, because we can do what the defenders of abortion cannot do. They may say, I'll take you inside an abortion clinic, but they won't. They don't want women to look at ultrasound pictures. They frame the issue as a matter of abortion rights, abstract rights. And let me give you one phrase that I used repeatedly in 29 years of editing World: the ladder of abstraction. Very often, people who are pursuing a particular ideological end are very high up the ladder, particularly when it comes to abortion. People on the pro-abortion side won't refer it. They won't show us pictures of unborn children. They won't refer to babies. They'll be abstract, high on the ladder of abstraction. They want us to worship a cultural trinity: choice, convenience, personal comfort. So we need to urge them and tens of millions of others to climb down the ladder of abstraction. Journalists, you could say, are now in the suites of the arena, high up. some in luxury boxes, some are bare bones, but they won't look at the bones. They need to leave behind abstract sweet level oratory and see vividly truth on the ground at sweet level. I had my hobby for a long time was getting a press pass and going to Major League Baseball games. And the part of it I loved the most was before the game at batting practice, being able to stand behind the cage and just watch the way players would try to make adjustments in their swing. Even veteran players would work on that. And sometimes we have to make adjustments in our swings, keeping in mind the goal of presenting life at street level, not sweet level. We have a choice, in a sense, on the pro-life side. When people complain, when journalists are obnoxious, when professors orate about abstract rights, we can scream, 4444, stand for life. Or we can ask calmly but consistently, why do some women have abortions even when they really don't want to? And I think there are four answers to that. I mean, first, some abort for financial reasons. It does happen. I really think, and I come here as a veteran, I took a leave of absence from University of Texas for a couple of years in 1995 and 1996 to commute to Washington and work for welfare reform, which I thought and still think is important. But I also think at this point we should have some national and state policies that provide enough assistance for women with small children that no one feels compelled to kill because of money. And this is a tough choice. We don't want to encourage single parenting. On the other hand, we want to encourage life and help women not to have to sometimes make that financial choice. So it's a tough thing at times. It's a tough judgment. And you have to sometimes get down in the field and stand behind the batting cage and look at what's going on in batting practice. Second, some abort because boyfriends or parents pressure them to. You may remember that we used to talk about parental involvement and so forth, which is a good thing, but there are some parents who actually push hard for abortion. And here in the past 10 years, I mean, we had the Me Too movement, which made us much more aware of sexual abuse and pressure than we were a decade ago. I think we should see that when men pressure women to abort, it's another abuse that should be exposed and opposed. I mean, it should be illegal, basically, I think, to pressure a woman to abort in the same way that it's illegal or certainly unethical and illegal in some jurisdictions to pressure a woman to have sex when she doesn't want to. It should be against the law to pressure a woman to abort. That's another type of abuse. And I think we need to sometimes adjust our stance a little bit in the batting cage to try to work on types of things like that. Third reason some women have abortions, and this is particularly true about some young female journalists. And by the way, most of the people going to journalism these days are female. And sometimes it's very hard to find young women in journalism who aren't for abortion because they are there to have a career and they don't want a little person to get in their way. Again, sometimes there's pressure from boyfriends, but sometimes the pressure is internal. The career is more important. I think they're making a mistake, but as long as they see it as a binary choice, either single parenting or abortion, a lot of them are going to choose abortion. So we need to emphasize once again the alternative of adoption. There have been a lot of articles in recent years, negative articles about adoption. I think some of them are generated by pro-abortion sympathies. Some of them are aware of the difficulties, and I know it's hard. My wife and I have 3 children born to us. We adopted a 4th. It's hard sometimes. It's been hard, but with all the difficulties, it's also good. And as long as adoption is pretty much out of the picture, the more recent statistics may be a little better than this, but at one point there were of all the pregnancies that advanced to a certain point, about 49% of those kids were being born, 49% were being aborted, only 2% were being adopted. As long as it seems like a binary choice, that's a real problem. So we have to promote adoption as an alternative. So let's see. I've talked about 3 of the reasons, but I've promised 4. There's financial pressure, there's boyfriend and parent pressure, there's career mindedness. And the final fourth is made up of those who are truly unsure. And here's where, to quote from the classic movie Casablanca, we need to remember that the fundamentals still apply as time goes by. We can do one thing that our abortion opponents cannot do. We can show, don't tell, show the pictures. A young World Magazine reporter, a young woman who's a very fine writer, and we came out with a big book last year, The Story of Abortion in America. This is a book. I think Joe was telling me it's going to be used as a kind of raffle door prize. This copy, but it can also be used as a door stop. It's big enough for that. The book, and I hope someone will raffle, and maybe others will go to Amazon and get it. It includes lots of descriptions. It goes back to the 1660s, the first stories we know of abortion in America. This was in Maryland at the time. But it includes descriptions of how people reacted positively in the late 19th century when female pro-life doctors, and there were a lot of them, they gave lectures describing what unborn children looked like at every stage of development. And a lot of women had never heard that before, and that made a big difference. I write in that book about how people reacted positively to an exhibition at the 1939 World's Fair in New York City that showed lifelike models of unborn children. They had never seen this before, and wow, they were impressed. And then later on, some older people like me may remember in about 1965, when people reacted to Life magazine's publication of photos of unborn children, beautiful photos by a Swedish photographer. When was the last time that you saw a photo of an unborn child in a major news publication? I haven't for a long time. If any of you have, please email a copy to me. Just email me, marvin.olasky@gmail.com. Let me talk about journalism just a little bit more. My wife and I have a small foundation called Zenger House. There was a Christian New York newspaper editor in 1735 named John Peter Zenger, Z-E-N, not Zinger, although that's journalistically appropriate, but Zenger, Z-E-N-G-E-R. So we have Zenger House. He was brave. He went to prison because he wrote articles exposing the practices of the royal governor. If you go to this website, zengerhouse.com, it's one word there, Zenger, Z-E-N-G-E-R House. We give out Zenger prizes every year. They're not quite up to the level of Pulitzer prizes at this point, but we've done this for 3 years so far. We give out Zenger prizes. We did it in 2002, 2003, and just last month. We've been able to award in these 3 years, at 10 a year, we've been able to award only one for a pro-life story. And I'd like to give more, but they're hard to find. So if you see a good one, please email me again, marvin.olasky@gmail.com. So we're trying to do our little bit to change journalistic practice, or at least give honor to journalists who tell the truth. I do have, the big book is I didn't want to carry all the main on. I do have 2 smaller books here. This one, it's called Abortion at the Crossroads. And I wrote this, I was trying to decide whether after writing 3 books on abortion years ago, I wanted to get in this again. So this came out, I think in 2019 or so, 2020. And I was using this as spring training. Am I able then, do I want to go through a full thing, writing a big book like this? So this was my spring training, but it tells the basic pretty well. If you want to read something that's a lot shorter. And I have a bunch of copies of that. A couple of you were telling me you're familiar with my own story of going from Judaism to atheism to communism to Christ back in 1976 through God's mercy. So this kind of tells a story about that, and I have a bunch of copies of that back there. And I know you have been faithful in supporting the Alliance here. I also hope you'll be interested in trying to improve journalism. And so, they'll be back there after we finish, and just take one if you want, and either give me or send me a check for any amount whatsoever, from 1 cent to $1 million. Just give me Yeah, give me a check. Give me a check made out to Zenger House. Or 4444. Yeah. Yeah, give me a check made out to Zenger House, Zenger. If you don't have your checkbook, take a book anyway, and you can send a check again for any amount to me. 4106 First View Drive here in Austin. It's tax deductible, so include your email if you send me one. So I can send you a receipt. I want to conclude with. This is a column. I'll just read the end of a column I wrote in World back in 1990, emphasizing the same thing about pictures. I mentioned that insist that the American people be shown facts, not just ideologies. On talk shows, instead of arguing so much, we need to show a picture or describe the specifics of children made after God's image. Then we need to pray that God's created beauty will touch hearts. In the end, our decision on tactics comes down to a theological understanding. Just as no one has ever been argued into heaven, so I doubt whether anyone has ever been argued by the force of our speech making to a pro-life view, we need to show and let God tell. And then here's the end of this. And this is one of my own heroes, a fellow named Whittaker Chambers, who lived, he was a Communist Party member in the 1920s and 1930s. He came to believe in God, and he dated his initial break with communism to the time his young daughter smeared porridge on her face. Chambers found himself looking at her, quote, intricate, perfect ears, end quote. He saw immense design, not a chance coming together of atoms. And this is what he wrote. At that moment, the finger of God was first laid upon my forehead. So I hope and pray that millions of Americans, at the moment they see an intricately made unborn child, maybe sucking his thumb, that they'll hear not a great and powerful wind, not an earthquake, but a gentle whisper. And that will change their lives and save lives. Thank you very much. I've just been told, can you do a Q&A, which is very dangerous when you're talking about a professor, particularly a former professor, because anyway, sure. Or shout out your question, and you can also say 4444. Well, so you're saying she had 4 children, okay, adopted, sure, and there's been a newspaper or magazine article about her or something like that. Okay, sure. Yeah. Send me a note, marvin.olasky@gmail.com, and I'd like to know about them. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thank you, and thank her. Yeah. Yeah, good question. We have not only a generally a non-biblical culture, but also a very lonely culture. In fact, in England, there was appointed several years ago a minister for loneliness. That was the official title. people need the vertical relationship with God. People also need horizontal relationships. And if some people aren't interested at all, or they may think they're not interested in the vertical relationship, maybe the horizontal relationship can get to them. So churches can be welcoming communities, and for women who have had abortions, it's very important to have a welcoming community. They might think that, well, people in church are going to hate them. We have to make sure that our churches will actually love them. So we have to invite people to church and make them welcoming places, and not places where, let's say, a woman who's had an abortion or a woman who's had 4 abortions, that someone's going to yell 4, 4, 4, 4 at them. So I think that's the basic. To welcome people. We're all sinners. We're all deeply dependent on the mercy of God, and we have to make sure that that's a message that our churches certainly send out and are welcoming. So yeah, thanks for the question.
Okay, here's a question that comes from Corpus Christi, Texas, one of our supporters.
Yes.
Yeah, I wanted to echo, we have in Corpus Christi Hope House, which is a crisis pregnancy center, has 12 apartments for women in crisis pregnancy. And one of the huge things about it is when I have associates of mine who say, well, you just don't care about the women, or you care about just not having an abortion. We have a place where these women, most of whom are kicked out, as you say, by their families or by their boyfriends. And we have a place for them to stay. And then we stay with them even after the baby's born. We counsel them how to find a job, counsel them going to school, counsel them how to fix their car, doing the things in life that they need to learn. But it is huge. It's made a huge impact on the culture of life in Corpus Christi.
Yeah. Quick story. And yeah. Quick story. Years ago, I was giving a talk at a banquet for the Tucson, Arizona Crisis Pregnancy Center. And I met a fellow who had been the editor of whatever the major daily newspaper in Tucson was. And he was abstractly on the pro-abortion side. But he went to that dinner, and a couple of the people who spoke at that dinner were women who had contemplated having abortion, but then through the work of the Crisis Pregnancy Center there, they hadn't, and they had their children with them. And this editor was very moved by it. It didn't change his abstract position, but he actually, this is again back in 1990 or so, but he wrote a very positive article and saying that, I know many readers here, and I mean, we're on the pro-choice side, but you can't help but be moved when you actually see these small children who otherwise would have been aborted. So, hey, if that can touch the heart of a generally mean editor, as most editors, including myself, often are, then that's something that's huge to do. So, yeah, I am very thankful for the body of Christ in Corpus Christi, saving lives. Yeah.
And we have 2 adopted grandchildren, and so we're very well aware that it's a very lengthy and expensive process to adopt a child these days. I'm wondering what the state of Texas can do to lower the barriers for adoption.
Joe, you might want to speak about that, or someone else with expertise, because I'm not exactly sure what the law in Texas is now. But we adopted our youngest son a long time ago in Maryland at that time when I was on leave and doing research in the Library of Congress that led to one of these books. So I knew the Maryland law, but I still don't know. I should know the Texas law. I don't.
Well, if everybody gets out to vote and we get the right people in office, the legislature is meeting in January of 2025. Next thing, this is one of the issues that will come up. There's no simple, easy answer. I can tell you that. And part of it is the state of Texas wants to assure that every couple, family that adopts these children, that it is a fit home and there's no possibility of abuse and so forth. You can understand that's an expensive process. But I think there's some things we can do. It's going to be very interesting to see that now that abortion is not so available as it was before, will there be more women choosing to place their babies for adoption? And that's something we're trying to encourage, because the more babies available, the more then there would be more babies available for adoption. And that's been a part of the hang up all these decades. Don't have an easy answer yet. Just stay tuned and we'll see what we can do.
Good, thanks.
Next question. We've got time for maybe one, maybe two more questions. Just a second, Nick. Nick, just a second. This question is from New Zealand. Okay. These are the Brumners from our supporters from New Zealand.
What if this is the last child you can have? Because often abortion or other influences can lead to sterilization. We are involved in promoting adoption in New Zealand, and we're working to make adoption easier. It's difficult in New Zealand. So why does it have to be murderous? Why can't it just be an eviction? Maybe we can move abortion towards the eviction mentality, so that you're not, saddled with a renter for life or something. I don't know. Then you have a child. It's a good thing.
Yeah. Well, God bless you in New Zealand. And actually, I'd like to applaud the New Zealand pro-life people. I don't think I've talked with one before, so thank you.
We have time for one more question.
So I have a young lady that I know that is interested in being a journalist, and honestly, she's Christian, very conservative. Like, what chance do young conservative people have to enter into the journalist field? And any words of advice, what role will alternate medias play in the pro-life movement?
No, it's a good question. The journalism profession, as far as it being a place that people can count on for full-time work that'll go on, is a tough one these days. I mean, so many newspapers have gone out of business, and average staff has been cut by more than 50%. And you see what happens, what the American Statesman looks like now. So it's very hard. And then it's particularly hard, I think, for sometimes for Christians who want to work on some of the established media because of the biases, and particularly when it comes to coverage of abortion and so forth. Nevertheless, number one, it is easier now than any time in American history to start today a news site, a newspaper. I mean, something that'll communicate with people. The question is anyone going to read? Is anyone going to look at it? But I'm convinced that good writing is so rare in America these days that anyone in school or through homeschool or anything, anyone who learns to write well and learns how to report specific detail is going to be able to put some bread on the table in some way. It may be bread without peanut butter or jelly, but a good writer will not starve is my hope and belief and prayer. So I'd say, whoever you can talk with who has potential there, it is a wonderful calling. It is so interesting. Tell people if they, I've been able to travel to 80 countries and go to 80 baseball parks, 80 Major League Baseball and spring training parks. So, so my own slogan would be 80, 80, 80. And so, yeah.
That's all the time we have for questions. Dr. Olasky, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Now he's making his way